everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my full-on spoiler review for Joker Folie A Deux. Now you can check out my non-spoiler review of the movie and I will leave a link within the description, but this won't be a chronological breakdown of the film but more an outlining of the standout elements which I thought worked well, and also the elements that I thought didn't work as well, and what ultimately was a disappointing and very pointless sequel overall. So your final warning now, spoilers for Joker Folie A Deux coming in 3, 2, 1. So the first element I want to talk about was the animated sequence. This was an opening very much in the style of Looney Tunes, which had Arthur Fleck in his suit and clown makeup, very much retracing the steps of the sequence that we saw in a climatic act of the first film where he appeared on the television show. This wasn't terrible, but I just felt like a lot of the scenes within the film, it was very unnecessary. I'm not sure why they chose to update or very much begin the movie in this style. It didn't really add anything. It wasn't particularly stunning or great animation itself, and it just wasn't, I think, the best choice in order to open a movie like this. It went on for around, I think, 2 to 4 minutes. Very strange opening sequence, but again, nothing to damage the overall film. But I just think, again, it was an odd choice, much like what we saw throughout the rest of the film. The next element I probably want to talk about is the opening for 10 minutes, which, to be honest, I felt was a decent start. This is where we open up the film with Fleck in prison and we see him being mocked by the prison guards and we see him adjusting to life in the prison. And this was a very much downbeat, somber tone in terms of the movie, and I think that was the more ideal way to open this film. Catching up with Fleck post the events of the first film, seeing how he's adjusting to life in Arkham Asylum. And this was of course before all of the music started to take place, and I think again this was a decent start, and this is how this Joker film should have started overall. We had all of those scenes where we see Fleck walking in the rain and his nervous laugh, and I think Joaquin Phoenix's performance again was very good, and these scenes overall were very good, as well as his interactions with the prison guard who was played by Brian Gleason. I think we could have done well to have more of his character throughout the rest of the story, but minus the animated sequence, this was a decent opening start. We'll then talk about the notorious choice of having all of the musical numbers, and to be honest, most of the songs I wasn't too familiar with. I probably feel that there were some huge licensing fees in acquiring all of this musical material, which probably was one of the biggest reasons why the budget was so high, which I still can't believe was at $200 million. But I think when the music started to really take effect of the film was that sequence where we see Arthur and the prisoners watching his news coverage on a TV screen. We have, of course, the appearance of a young Harvey Dent pressing for the death penalty for Arthur. And he breaks out into this song which must last around 3 to 4 minutes, and I really didn't see the point of it. It didn't add any context. He has quite a few musical numbers. I think vocally, I think Joaquin Phoenix did fine. We all know, of course, that he did perform songs for the Johnny Cash biopic Walk the Line many years ago. So he would have been adept at producing this type of performance, but that was the first real sign that this movie was starting to lose its way and lose its overall direction. I just didn't see the point of this whole musical number, like a lot of what we saw later on throughout the rest of the film. We then had the other elongated musical number when we had that scene, I believe it was between Lee and Arthur Fleck. It was around about the hour mark or just past it, when they were talking in the interrogation rooms together. And this was the moment when I was starting to nod off and the film was really losing me. At this stage, we know that the two individuals are completely in love with one another, and they didn't use the songs to really develop the relationship or push it forward from an emotional context. As I stated in my non-spoiler review, I felt the chemistry between both Phoenix and Gaga was very good. There was a certain mystery in terms of the connection between these two, so I think in smaller doses they could have used the musicals to further their relationship and add some more complexity to overall connection, but sadly this wasn't the case. We did have another very long sequence, I believe it was 2/3 of the way through. This was during the courtroom chart, I believe, where we had Joker and Lee very much performing a concert. We had Arthur dancing on stage where we see Lady Gaga performing on piano, very much showcasing Lady Gaga's vocal talents, which she does have a great voice, but at the same time, where is his head in, showing no direction, very ponderous in the long run. So we will talk about, I think, what was probably one of the best sequences of the film, and that was the interview sequence between both Arthur and Steve Coogan. This was when Arthur's counsellor or lawyer, whatever you want to call her, was very much trying to build Arthur's case within the upcoming trial, trying to show him as a much more remorseful and very sympathetic type of figure. And of course, in terms of logic, this scene didn't make sense. Why would you have somebody who's committed multiple murders sitting right across from an interviewer with no guards around him? He could easily have got a weapon or just assaulted the interviewer. Why was there no further protection? But there were many logical gaps throughout this film, so this is kind of what you glossed over. But I think this was one of the few times where there was a certain intensity, as we could see certainly Arthur beginning to crack from any controlled status that he had, certainly without the beginning of the film. And I just think this was overall a very good performed scene, very well acted by both Phoenix and Steve Coogan. The other high moment was when we see the return of Arthur's former co-worker Gary Puddles from the first film, when he came in to give his overall testimony. And this was again generating a lot of tension, because you wondered what exactly he was going to say, especially when Arthur took his turn to interrogate him. Again, another nonsensical idea that Arthur would ever be given any type of license to defend himself in court. But I just think, again, the way that the music was at times during this encounter, the way that it built up, certainly the suspense, if there was any suspense throughout this entire movie, I thought, again, this was a very good scene. And again, the movie could have benefited with more encounters like this. We will then talk about Lady Gaga and her portrayal of Harley Quinn. Now, we all know the origin of the character. Coming from the Batman animated series, she was very much the fangirl, if you like, of the Joker, and the huge fascination with her character is how can any individual find any love or desire or affection for somebody like the Joker. I think at the core, that's the real heart of the character. Now, we all know throughout the last 10 to 15 years, Harley Quinn as an entity, as a personality, has definitely taken a metamorphosis in terms of different iterations, whether it be throughout movies, animation, or computer games, where they've tried to very much individualize the character away from the Joker so she can stand on her own, whether she's been the primary leader of the Suicide Squad, whether she's had various relationships, be it with the likes of Poison Ivy or Lieutenant Montoya. But I still believe that no portrayal has ever come close to what we saw within the Batman animated series, and many people were hoping that seeing the trailers and seeing the fact that Lee would build her relationship with the Joker inside Arkham, that we would get a return to that kind of fangirl, obsessive dynamic that I think is the truest form of the character. Now, overall, whilst I think Lady Gaga was fine in the role, I don't think they quite nailed it here. Because as we get certainly towards the end of the conclusion of the film, it's established that Lee is much more obsessed with the idea of the Joker, the concept of the Joker. Of course, we know that her and other characters have seen Arthur's antics on the TV screen, and that's where they built up their very much worshipping of him. But I don't believe that's true nature of the character. I think Harley is completely in love with the Joker completely, whether it's Arthur or the idea of the Joker or a combination of both. She's unrelenting in her fascination and her love, and she will do anything for him. So I think it was a bit of a kick in the face to any loyal Harley Quinn fans to have her completely dismiss Arthur at the end of the movie, that she wasn't really connected to Arthur at all. This is of course coming from the revelation where we see in the climactic act of the courtroom trial, where Arthur all of a sudden comes to the realization that the Joker persona is not real, that he was just Arthur. He admits or confesses to killing all of the people from the first film, and this is what ultimately disconnects Harley from him. We have the indication that she kills herself when she puts the gun to her head, but obviously she refrained from doing so. I was a bit confused with the whole origin of the character. She came from a rich family, she committed herself, or was it her mother that committed herself to Arkham? Whether she wanted to escape from her mundane life. They do establish that she did burn her family's apartment down, and again we had reference to that later on without the film, where we see her burning the musical sheets, I believe, as they're watching the film. Again, logistically, that would make no complete sense. They wouldn't give any access to any prisoner to be able to just walk away and start setting fire to things. So again, another silly moment within this film. But I just found this interpretation a bit jaded, a bit maybe too cynical, that she only wanted to love what she wanted to love. And I think, again, that's not really true to the overall Harley Quinn character. As soon as she realised that he didn't stand up to what she thought she was or what she wanted him to be, she just drops him and completely walks away. Again, it didn't make sense. The whole sequence where he locates her on the steps and she's just sitting there. So I just think as the movie went on, we became a bit more too distant from her as a character. And again, because the film ended the way that it did, we didn't really care about much what happened to her going forward. So we'll quickly focus on Arthur as a character himself. And I think that there was far less progression this time around than certainly what we saw within the first film. Again, my thoughts on the original movie is that I didn't really find this character particularly appealing. I felt for the most part he was very much of a drama queen. He was somebody who wasn't necessarily traumatized by his abuse as what we saw throughout the first film. He was all about not getting enough attention. He wanted to be the superstar. He wanted to be the celebrity. He wanted to be the one that everybody focused on. We saw this in the climatic acts of the first film where he was very much a rock star amongst the riot. That's really all that he was about. And many people were wanting to see very much more the transition from this mental illness sufferer to much more of the classic criminal that we all know from the original source. And it just wasn't that progression. I think the only progression, if there was any development here, was that he came to realise that the Joker was a persona. But I think to an extent, we already had that in the first film, particularly in the last moments where it was certainly hinted that everything that went on was certainly in his head. So we just repeated the same beats here. The only really potential that we saw here for any further development was 2/3 of the way through, where it certainly hinted at, if not established, that Arthur is sexually assaulted by the guards in the prison, which is certainly the most darkest moment of the film. And I think that was the one chance where they really could have elevated all of the tension and suspense and really push forward and have that as one of the most climactic moments that would certainly see Arthur change much more into the psychotic supervillain that we all know. But they just wasted away. I think initially, after that scene happens and we see Arthur broken down in his cell in darkness, we again go back to Harley Quinn singing once more. So that was another potential moment that was completely wasted. Again, just a throwaway moment for that particular scene, and a throwaway moment, I think, completely for the character. So we will then talk about the movie's ending, and this was following the quite ridiculous moment when, having been given his guilty verdict in the courtroom, we see a few of his supporters outside bomb the courtroom, which allows Arthur to escape. And this was logical to a certain point of view, because we thought, okay, Arthur has to escape somehow, and he's not going to do it within the prison, which is what I thought they should have built in the film towards. So to have somebody break him out of the courtroom trial, okay, fair enough. But shortly after that, he meets Harley Quinn, as I mentioned before. She dismisses him. The cops catch up with him straight away. He made no attempt to hide himself. He's just walking outside in the open. Again, this makes no sense whatsoever. But as we see him back in Arkham, we see him walking forward, and we catch up with one of the other prisoners that we were only getting a few glimpses of throughout the film. There was no hint that this character was going to be anything significant, and then we turn around and we see Arthur talking to him, and he raises the questions of a joke about Arthur from the first film, and then he stabs him constantly, leaving Arthur bloodied and on the floor. And then you can see in the background, they blur it out, but you can see that this character starts to cut his face up, presumably making a smile that we know the Joker to have later on throughout various iterations. And this was, I think, another sign of how I think the director Todd Phillips really didn't care about what was happening within his film. Why go through all of those songs and dance numbers if you're just going to kill off the character at the end? It virtually means that there's been no progression to the character as what we saw at the beginning of the film. And I think a lot of fans were very disappointed here, because having gone on that journey throughout the first film, leaving that huge potential, if you were going to do the sequel, to take the character to various heights, to just kill him off at the end, supposedly. I mean, again, they could turn it around and have him somehow recover from those fatal wounds and then go on to become the classic villain in the third installment, if we do indeed get that. I've seen a lot worse. We've seen many times before with characters in certain films certainly seem like they're going to meet their death and then they make some sort of miraculous return. But again, it just makes the film and the story completely pointless, just killing him off at the end. And I just think ultimately it was just a very non-impactful scene, a very non-impactful death, not having any type of message or not even anything to provoke your thought. And I think that's something at least the first film could have had with its ending here, where at least you were thinking about it for certain moments coming out of the film after watching it, whereas this time the scene just left you absolutely very much confused as to what exactly they were going for here. And once I walked out the cinema, this was the film that I would never go back to again after watching it. And I just think it's a very sad and disappointing way to end this overall film. So that's it overall in terms of my spoiler review of Joker Folie A Deux. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you have any other further movies, television series, or any other topics within the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd like to see me cover, then also let me know within the comments. And as usual, I will cover the overall box office opening within the films on its opening weekend of release. We'll no doubt get some very interesting numbers when that comes to pass. So look out all for that content in the upcoming future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.